Good morning. I would like to welcome both of you to our seminar. I just thank the Hungarian government for being so kind with us and present you to discuss with us the Hungarian experience with the bank transaction tax. And I would like to introduce Ms. Timea Borok. If you could raise your hand so that we know which one. Yes, hello, very nice to meet you. And to her left, Ms. Virág Lipták. Both of them work for the Hungarian government and will be discussing with us the experience with the Hungarian bank transaction tax. Thank you very much to both of you. We have a we are very curious to know how the Hungarian government evaluates the experience with a bank transaction tax. As you know, we've had such a form of taxation in Brazil for 12 years, from 1992 up to 2007, but it was discontinued. And so I would like, if possible, to have some answers to a few questions that we would like to ask you as we are considering reintegrating such a taxation in Brazil. The first question that I would like to ask both of you is why the proposal of the financial fee, I understand you call it financial fee, why the bank transaction tax was introduced in Hungary.
Good morning and bom dia, Professor Sintra. It is a very big honor to participate in this discussion for us. So some words about the introduction of the financial transaction tax. The financial transaction tax was introduced in Hungary in 2013. So the law appeared in 2012. And actually, the basics of the legislation have not been modified deeply since then. So only smaller modifications were introduced. The reason for introducing the bank transaction tax is the finance state of the budget of Hungary. So the financial crisis between 2008 and 2009 began to go away, but the consequences were still present in the country. So it was decided to help the budget with the introducing. So the government was committed to maintain the budget deficit target and decided to introduce this tax. Also, this was in line with the overall tax policy of Hungary, which was to transforming the tax structure to reduce the share of the public burdens on labor and increase the role of the turnover taxes. So this is basically the background of the introducing of the bank tax.
Good morning, Professor Sintra. It's an honor to speak with you. And in relation to the indirect taxes, a problem usually is tax evasion, and to keep this evasion at a minimum. Hungary managed to handle the tax evasion on turnover consumption taxes with a great success through the obligatory digitalization of invoicing and reporting the invoices and the cashier checks to the tax authority, and also the promotion of the means of electronic payment. And this is the point where the bank transaction tax comes into the question, because the duty is created a way to help the electronic means of payment, because the levy is at a lower rate on the electronic payments. And also the financial transaction tax is a good tax from the point of view of tax evasion, because the money circulation, the payment transactions are done by a regulated market, where you don't expect that the evasion is high. So you can control this aspect.
Could you let us know what is the amount of the tax, and did it reach up to your expectations in terms of return, in terms of revenue?
We have a figure for 2021, and the figure is 230 billion Hungarian forints, which is around 10 billion forints higher than the previous year. So this is the 9th largest tax in Hungary, practically. First largest is the value-added tax.
This is the second largest?
No, ninth
largest. Okay. And what is the percentage that you charge on the transaction fees?
The percentages depend on what kind of transaction you speak about. The general rate is 0.3% per transaction, and there is a cap on the general rate, which is 6,000 Hungarian forints.
Okay.
If we speak, this is the general rate is for money transfers, collection of money and deposits. If we speak about, for example, bank card transactions, then the rate is 800 Hungarian forints per year for one bank card. If the card has a function of how to say this, sorry, I have to check, is a contact, the card is contactless, so you just use the chip inside it, then it's 5,000 forint per year.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very beneficial tax rate. And I have to say that, on the contrary, if we speak about cash withdrawal, the rate is 0.6% per one withdrawal, and there is no upper cap on cash withdrawals. So this, yes, this shows how this tax promotes the online transactions and cashless transactions.
Okay. We had in Brazil a very difficult technical discussions to introduce such a taxation. And it's a very polemical type of taxation, being a turnover tax. So we would like to know what were the difficulties in approving such a tax in the European Union, and particularly your discussions with the European Central Bank. Was it easily approved, or it took a long time and it was a very, say, difficult and polemical discussion?
I think that is a quite difficult question. So the European Commission published the proposal on a harmonized financial transaction tax amongst the European member states in 2011. And the objectives of the financial transactions were to ensure that the financial sector make a fair and substantial contribution to the public finances, and also to discourage financial transactions which do not contribute to to the efficiency of financial markets or of the real economy. And the proposal was to harmonize the tax base and set minimum rates for all transactions on secondary financial markets, once at least one EU party was involved in the transaction. And also the tax rates were foreseen were 0.1% for the trading in shares and bonds and 0.01% for derivatives. And by mid-2012, the EU finance ministers decided at the ECOFIN meeting that they could not reach an unanimous agreement on the proposal for an EU-wide financial transaction tax, and they cannot really do that also in the foreseeable future. But then, at the end of September of 2012, 11 member states decided to form a group, and they asked it to be allowed to introduce a common system on financial transaction tax, so these 11 member states. And this would have been based on the scope and the objectives of the Commission's initial proposal. But actually, they are still working on it, and Hungary decided not to participate in this cooperation.
Enhanced cooperation.
Yeah, in this enhanced cooperation, yes. So Hungary is participating in this enhanced cooperation as an observer at the moment. And I have to let you know that also one country, Estonia, left this group. So at the moment, 10 member states participate in this enhanced cooperation.
Okay, and why has not this directive followed by other countries? I understand that the only European country that has such a form of taxation is Hungary. Do you know of any other country that is considering adopting such a taxation too, following the directives?
We don't have information on that. The European Commission's proposal has a different scope than the Hungarian proposal, so it's very important to highlight that the Commission's proposal is taxing the secondary financial markets, so the trading in shares and bonds and derivatives. But the Hungarian financial transaction duty is levied on banking transactions, so simple transfer of money, exchange of money, and so on, cash withdrawal. So it's a very different scope, I believe. So it's the two taxes are not comparable, I believe.
Sure. Okay. Let me ask you. What is the importance of a transaction fee in terms of revenues? And the most important question, is there a trend, an upward trend or a downward trend in terms of revenues? Because there is a claim that such a taxation with time has a loss in terms of revenue potential. Could you tell us something about this?
In Hungary, at least in 2020 and 2021, we can see an upward trend. If transactions are larger and if there is, especially if there is inflation, then the revenues will be larger. Also, as the gray and the black economy reduces due to the many other rules that were introduced and also the digitalization of invoicing, etc., then the transactions shall appear in banking transactions practically, and all the cash that was in the black economy shall or not all, but a lot of cash that were previously in the black economy shall go to the banks, and so the banking transaction, the volume and also the number of the transaction shall raise. So we, at least in the last 2 years, experienced a raising of the revenues in the central state budget from the financial transaction duty. Also, it is important that this duty is levied on a very wide range of transactions. So we have mentioned that the rate is quite low, but it's a wide range of transactions. So it's a very good taxation. So it very well fits to the tax policy of the Hungarian government.
Very good. Let me ask you one point which is widely discussed. The fact that being a turnover tax, it could introduce disruptions in the economy and various forms of economic distortions. Has the Hungarian experience caused any disruption in the economy, such as bank flight, verticalization of the economy, use of foreign exchange in exchange for domestic currency transactions, and such things? Or has it been, such as happened in Brazil, a very smooth functioning without any serious trouble being raised in the economy?
I think that we can say that we did not experience any problems with the tax. So no serious disruptions were experienced by Hungary. On the contrary, we think that the tax or the duty plays a very important role in keeping up the white economy by directing payment transactions of the populations through bank accounts. So I think we think it is supporting actually to keep up the white economy.
Very good. I have another question that I would like to ask you. What has been the contribution of the bank transaction tax for the management of the Hungarian public finance during the pandemic? The question is, was it important, and was it a wise decision to introduce this tax? And is the purpose of the Hungarian government to keep on charging this tax, or is it being used as a temporary tax, such as happened in Brazil?
I think that the financial transactions duty was actually never a tax only temporary, but for a longer period. So we will keep this tax as far as we know.
Mm-hmm. And during the pandemic, there were a lot of steps accomplished in digitalization of also the payments and also the service providers and invoicing, and also it was reached that all shops, small shops even, have to accept bank cards. So they have to have this little thing where you can use the cards. And so all together, this goes together during the pandemic, that it was promoted not to use so much cash. So then even the shopkeepers were happy, so that they don't have to touch the banknotes. You could use the bank card with just
one touch.
With one touch, and so it was easier. So even during the pandemic, it was easier from a practical point of view, and also during the pandemic, this was an important revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Because during the pandemic, the Hungarian government tried to lighten the direct taxation a little bit with making administration a little bit easier for the taxpayers. But this revenue always came into the budget, so it has a really important part during the pandemic also.
Mm-hmm. I would like to ask you a final question to get your impressions on how did the Hungarian population accepted such a form of taxation. Was there a lot of complaint? Specifically, how did the banks looked on this form of taxation? Because here in Brazil, we have a lot of opposition from banks, even though for 12 years that it worked in Brazil, there was no serious impact on banking at all, or quite on the contrary. What has the experience in Hungary been in such a problem?
I think that just like every tax, bank tax has also some problems with the introduction. So both the bank sector and both the population. So what I would like to add, it is very important to clear out with the banks before the introduction that this tax is a common effort for the better budget. So best is if they can try to cooperate with the government and pay this tax without much comments. So here in Hungary, obviously the banks were not really happy about it, neither was the population, and there were some complaints also about it. So that is why I say that before the introduction, it is useful to clear things out with banks and also with the population.
Yes, and open conversation with the banking sector is very important in this case, because the taxpayer is the bank or the payment service provider practically, and also the tax cannot be recharged as a tax on the account holder, but obviously the payment service provider incorporates the levy in their fees. And so when the government introduced some easings or reduction, for example, in the amount of the levy, then it was an important point, so that this reduction also appears in the lowered banking fees. So that's why communication is important, because what the account holder sees is that there is a communication that, for example, up to there was, for example, in 2019, there was a reduction for the retail transfers up to 20,000 forints. So these were exempted from this date. And so people wanted to see the exemption in the bank fees. So then there was communication, and so in the end, the banks also understood that this is a common effort. So we have to work commonly to achieve the goals. And so the reduction, for example, this one that I mentioned, finally really appeared in the reduction of the banking fees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think this short conversation was extremely useful, and we would like to thank you very much, Ms. Borok and Ms. Lipták. It was an honor for us to hear your experience. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.